Um, so what I was saying is that walking into an environment where everybody is resisting synchronization, resisting the mimetic effect, so they're in a way disguising what they are or protecting themselves through being anti-mimetic is actually a huge part of that poem that I wrote, where everybody's communicating or anti-communicating, or I would say communicating, but just in a very non-synchronized way, really informs that poem and really calls into that seeking of mimicry, comfort, and solace. One of the lines that I have is like the fractured smile seeking what? Mimicry, comfort, and solace. And that looking for confirmation, and then the mask, that we can actually hide ourselves behind a mask by the suppressed or repressed mimicry. The complexity of the relationship between affect and cognition that characterizes the human, the dependence of cognition on affect and the senses, comes more clearly to the fore when we start to think about the way language, in the very process of making meaning, is implicated with rhythm and movement. This is something that Mary Bateson calls proto-conversation, and it has to deal with gazing. The way we look at things, the way we engage in conversation through the gaze, gesticulation, vocalization, types of signaling. These are all they're complementary. They're analogous. They're translatable. Movement, sound, and rhythm are all anterior to symbolic verb communication and provide a prototype for it. Gesture, for example, is the forceful presence in language. And I said before, I was talking before about how 10% of communication is word, 20%-ish, and this is more or less. 20% is in tone of voice, but 70% of our communication actually takes place through body language. And so Merleau-Ponty, Gibbs is going to take a quote from that, says, writers don't deliver messages, they make gestures. So it's looking at language and the written word as gesture. They are essential prerequisites for and working collaborators with verbal communication. Language involves both serial and parallel modes of processing. It can also be thought of as a form of serial processing of experience that has already been parallel processed. Information from each of the senses is compared with memory of previous experiences in each modality before being combined. This represents the informational compression that is necessary because consciousness is a limited channel. Such compression condenses affective, sensory, and so-called cognitive forms of knowledge, creating procedural memory. This is the domain of habit, without which we can't function. It comprises motoric, perceptual, cognitive skills, as well as complex emotional patterns, such as the one Thompson codifies as affect scripts, and this allows us to engage in complex multitasking. The process of compression prompts a rethinking of just what is meant by cognition at all, especially when it is routinely associated with language. Cognition has been at once narrowly defined and too easily imagined as an independent high command mechanism that would assess and arbitrate other ways of knowing. No special mechanism is completely in charge, or, if in charge, able to endure as a stable mechanism. What results from this picture is a distributed authority that makes cognition as elusive to define as the power in the democratic form of government or the meaning in a sentence. There is no pure cognition, no cognition uncontaminated by the richness of sensate experience, including affective experience. And this, I thought, was really, with me going out and taking poetry that I have written and sharing it with people from all different social, economic, and cultural backgrounds, I thought language really seemed to be doing that. It seemed to be tapping into something that was compressed memories and these words carried, and we talk about the baggage and the heritage and the etymology of language, but we ourselves create our own little etymology of words as we use them and go through life experiencing in a sensate way the use and abuse at times of language. So I thought that was really, that language did actually function in that way as a way of tapping into that compressed consciousness, but also as gestures towards that mimetic, democratic mechanism of cognition, the I think, therefore I am. Language also enables a reflective handle on experience, opens new forms of agency, articulates temporal relations, and links things distant in time or place. Language is the highest level of mimetic behavior. It is a medium into which the earlier powers of mimetic production and comprehension have passed without residue, to the point that they have liquidated those of magic. An archive of non-sensuous correspondence. Felt relations can be shared at any distance from the sensuous forms they evoke. And I would say that is more so true the more you know somebody when they write to you, the closer you are to them, then I would say that the more powerful that language is going to be. But I think of Barthes when he argues the death of the author. For the birth of the reader to occur, the author must die, because at some point we can never truly know the authors of a lot of the material that we read. So for the text to take on a life, we have to kill the author off and let the reader take control of the book and impart or open up those compressed conscious memories and open up those channels for them to give life to the text. And though later, 10 years, he came back and said, well, we should probably invite the author as not an authority, but as a guest to the text themselves, because there's a divorcement that happens when an author writes text, and then as the distance occurs. But the power of language is to translate those experiences, and touching on something that's universal and that's a shared experience actually gives, I would say, purchase to for the reader to a text. And that would be true of poems as well as novels and all forms of literature. So language is an action at a distance. It nevertheless acts directly on the body. So whenever something in your memory is jogged, your body will respond. You will have those neurological responses and those chemical responses that give you a minor sensation of something once felt. Metaphor not only often derived from bodily processes, but they excite sympathetic response in the form of embodied stimulation, in which the same way as mirror neurons do. Language is in fact highly dependent on the body's physical capacities for its effectivity. It is also very selective and concentrating on evoking experience in one sensory channel at a time. The body, then, is not so much a medium as a series of media, each of which connects in its own way with technological media, including writing. Memisis produces the virtual by enabling the resembling of these disparate media, giving rise to what is real without being crucial, ideal without being abstract. And one of the questions that came up to me is if the body is the conduit for mimesis and transference of ideology, what does that say about gender and sex? Gender roles are ascribed, and sex is something that we are born either male or female, but it would affect how we interact with the world. And I'm not talking about just sexism and imposed gender roles, but there are some very distinct differences with the chemistry makeup between male, female, and the way our bodies function. And what would that say as far as us being media, much like technological media, and how our bodies engage with events and create meaning for us simultaneously, as Stuart Hall argues, if we did consider ourselves as a series of media operating and creating meaning out of events that we are engaged with. From an evolutionary perspective, mimesis makes symbolic thought possible. since symbolic thought originates in externalized acts. Mimesis can then be understood as a primary mode of apprehension utilized by the body, by social technologies such as cinema, television, and even the internet, and by the cultural processes involving crowd behavior, fad, celebrity, and pandemic of anorexia or depression, as well as the process of rapid shifts of social and political attitudes may occur. So mimesis to me seems to be going back to that contagion, to where it can actually transfer, not transfer in a contagious fashion, and can actually drive societies to act in a certain way, and it's something that's happening automatically, and it's mimesis at work, or ideology transference at work. The whole of human culture, then, is perhaps predicated on imitation, in which difference and innovation are as central as reproduction and similarity. And I would say experiences are always subjective, and there's no way around that. And it's not isolatory, but I do believe understanding that we are mimetic creatures does allow us the possibility of some more agency and autonomy, understanding the way our bodies work and the way our bodies function. Actually, I would think would be a great liberator, because it is something that to some degree can be negotiated. Two other orders of reality. One is local and learned or international, and the other is non-local and self-organizing. So there's that automatic, and then the nurturing, to where one is automatic and one is cultured and controllable. The passionate functions of writing and art, more generally, seem to offer a way of working in both dimensions simultaneously. The contemporary theoretical writing is increasingly borrowing the techniques and methods of fiction to this end, to where they're actually using the emotive, the mimetic, to elicit a response to something that's theoretical and abstract, is the argument of Gibbs. Interlocking sensation with story, and in the process recreating the essay as a heuristic for innovation. And so that's the end of that piece that I'm going to do on Gibbs. I did go back to the poem several times. There's a lot of historicity in the poem, which I think through writing, anybody who had studied those dates, and if you're a date person, those dates would just like scream out to you about slavery ending, the abolishment of slavery, the fact that we're in the time that we are at the beginning of slavery. So any of those things would actually come up, and it has to do with language transference and the auto response of the human to these words that are just down on paper. So that's it for Anna Gibbs, and next we will do probably Empire of the Senses, and or Thing Power. I'm going to go one way or the other. So